Sometimes there's so much beauty in the world. I feel like I can't take it. And my heart is just going to cave in.
After World War II, several factors, including a housing boom, saw many Americans move into suburban neighborhoods, ready to begin their own families. It was a large social shift, and suburbia became synonymous with white middle-class families. This lifestyle became intertwined with another core American ideal, the American dream. The idea of the American dream has existed for quite some time, but it has never reached the same heights it did after World War II. To own a home outside the city, to have cars outside the driveway, to be a working family that interacts with other working families down the block. In Sam Mendes' 1999 film American Beauty, the Burnham family, Lester, Karlyn, and Jane, lives in this classic American dream. A husband and wife, both working successful jobs, and a teenage daughter, all under a house in the middle of a suburban neighborhood. The Burnhams embody the concept of the American dream. But there's one extremely glaring problem. Every one of the Burnhams is completely unhappy with their life, unmotivated by themselves and the people surrounding them. In the film's opening scene, Jane monologues on a videotape about how much she resents her dad. The person recording, Ricky, is her lover. Ricky offers to kill him, a proposition Jane entertains. And it's a typical true crime love story, one that's haunted news headlines before. With this, one would expect that Jane and Ricky become the main protagonists of the film, though that doesn't end up being the case. Because after the credits roll, it's her father narrating instead. We see a typical morning in the life of the Burnham family, starting with Lester. The use of gray and white and the overall bleak color palette represents Lester's own ambitions. There are none. In this shot as he wakes up, the overhead angle frames Lester against his surroundings, versus a part of them in a way that a more hip-level angle would. For his family, it's a slightly different story, but not by much. His wife, Karlyn, is first seen in the house's front yard. The white picket fence and Karlyn's gray business clothes match with Lester, but there's a pop of color from the bed of roses she tends to. The roses are a symbol of care, specifically for appearances, because when Karlyn compliments their neighbor Jim on his tie, he makes a comment about her roses. And as one article put it, the relationship between neighbors in suburban neighborhoods was friendly, but it wasn't by any means close to a tight-knit community. People didn't expect much from each other in terms of behavior, but there was a clear need to keep up appearances, such as the clothes one wears or the way their house looks. So in this way, the roses could signify an illusion, a sort of shallow signal to people in the neighborhood that things are okay, and not in fact the way Lester reveals things are. And to further support that, Lester watches Karlyn's exchange with Jim through the window. With the framing here, Lester breaks up the two by being staged perfectly in the middle, showing how he doesn't share the same aptitude for these conversations. The shot is in shallow focus, another reminder of the shallowness Karlyn and the roses exude. When we get this over-the-shoulder shot from Lester's POV, he's still on the outside as a spectator and a voyeur. He doesn't have control of his life, not really. And with Jane, these shots display the red decor of her room. As Jane looks at breast augmentation surgery for herself, the red may represent insecurity or anger, or arguably it is also a type of deception or illusion for Jane to turn to plastic surgery. As the three sit in the car together, Lester is in the back by himself, watching Jane and Karlyn in the front. The introduction of the family illustrates all of their problems well. Lester is too pessimistic, Karlyn is too controlling, and Jane is too insecure. Their modern suburban family isn't the dream, but rather a box that is slowly suffocating them. In Lester's narration at the beginning, he admits that he's already been killed, even though we watch his life for the next year, up until his death. The film's opening voiceover coming from a deceased main character is a reference to Billy Wilder's 1950 classic Sunset Boulevard, known as a criticism of the golden age of Hollywood and fame as a whole. So in the same way, American Beauty operates as a criticism of suburbia and its materialism, the need to keep up appearances. At least, maybe initially, because things for the family begin to change when Lester meets Angela. There is an instant contrast between Lester as we first saw him and this new lust-lorn Lester. From the cuts, to the closeness of the shots, and the color, and the spotlights. Especially because both scenes come from Lester's point of view, but this sets off a chain of events that motivate the film. Lester changes his entire trajectory as a result of his need to impress Angela and ultimately seduce her. This ends up being exactly what he needs to bring color back in his life. There's clear distinctions between Lester's fantasies of Angela and his reality. The score shifts from something like this,
we used to be happy,
to this, The camera also tracks Lester, following his path and showing how he's taking control of his life once more. It's smoky, and as Lester approaches Angela, the backlighting makes Lester glow with happiness, in contrast to the darkness in his bedroom. In the bath, the light breaks on Angela, making her seem like a goddess. Not to mention, the red color of the roses that seems to take on a new meaning than before, one I'll elaborate on later. But the point is, Lester's new development in his mind breaks through the already established monotony of suburbia, the blandness and artifice he clearly despises. He's finally been given a purpose, however morally wrong that is. And because Lester changes, the entire family does too. Lester's first major course of action in the second act, which is the part of the film that navigates through this anti-suburban rebellion, is to quit his job and work at the fast food restaurant Smiley's. After getting his application there, the film cross-cuts to first Karlyn, who takes up a new hobby of shooting guns, and Jane, who begins to let Ricky into her life. It's not a direct cause and effect, but the film edits the scenes together like it is, creating a mental space where all of them are connected. So the switch from Jane's perspective of the film in the first scene to Lester's right after is because the narrative inevitably depends on him. Angela ends up being the disruption in the family that causes them to break out of their preconceived roles. But there are other characters that enter the setting, shaking everything up for the family too. The Fitz family moves in next door, with Ricky and his father, Frank, becoming a large part of the narrative. And then there's Buddy Kane, Karlyn's real estate company rival. The film draws pretty clear parallels between the Burnham family and some of these characters. First, there's Lester and Ricky. Both characters have this predatory gaze, looking through windows and creeping on Angela and Jane, both of whom, as we'll see later, are also connected. In shots like these, the two are isolated from the world, but they're isolated together as if they're one person. Lester is only drawn away by his obligations as a married adult, having to return home with his wife. When Ricky becomes friends with Jane, he begins to ride in her car in the same spot Lester took at the beginning of the film. Next, there's Karlyn and Frank. Now, this is the only pair who don't really directly interact, and they're more spiritually and narratively connected. They're the ones driving their children to school, but they're also spiraling and attempting to regain control, particularly over their family members. There's parallels between certain crucial scenes, which I'll bring up later. And finally, there's Angela and Jane. As best friends, they spend most of their time together, but more than that, they often share frames. For example, at the basketball game, there's first this POV from Lester of Jane watching his daughter's first performance as a cheerleader, but then Angela enters and there's a symmetrical split down the middle of the two. Eventually, Lester fully directs his attention to Angela, distinguishing her out of the pair. That last sentence is very important because it illustrates the differences between the two. Further connecting Angela and Jane is the true story of Amy Fisher. Alan Ball, the film's writer, was inspired by Fisher's story in the headlines. A 17-year-old girl who entered a relationship with an older man and after falling in love with him, shot the man's wife, with Angela and Lester's relationship festering, and Jane being in a true crime relationship. As I mentioned before, the characters end up being two branches of Fisher. Now, all of these characters are extremely similar, but they actually end up being foils of one another. This, most conflictingly, occurs between Angela and Jane. Jane is the stereotypical good daughter, while Angela is the more troublesome daughter. Remember that our introduction to Jane is her looking at breast augmentation, while our introduction to Angela is almost flaunting her breasts, petals floating out towards Lester. Angela is a more beautiful version of Jane, who already feels insecure about her own appearance. This is demonstrated further by the lack of attention she receives from her father, who becomes obsessed with Angela instead. Angela even says herself that
there's nothing worse in life than being ordinary.
Which Jane agrees with, although hesitantly, likely because she feels she's nothing special herself. And here's how Ricky differs from Lester. He's obsessed with Jane instead of Angela. He sees beauty in the ordinary, like Jane, whereas Lester cannot. He's a less jaded, younger, and lighter version of Lester, literally. For Frank, he exhibits his power over Lester where Karlyn cannot. This comes at the end of the film, where Karlyn drives home, determined to shoot her husband. But it's Frank that gets there first with his own pistol, killing Lester himself. So instead of being exact mirrors, these three pairs are more like two sides of the same coin. Maybe they come from the same places, or they're fighting the same things. In the film, beauty manifests itself in different ways, though it's maybe the most universal in its depiction of desire. Obviously with Lester, but also with Frank Fitz. Despite his character being homophobic the whole film, he ends up wanting Lester himself. Towards the end, Frank approaches Lester, attempting to kiss him. His attraction to Lester is bubbling over, infecting the red color and lighting of the scene. The rain ends up being the unraveling of this desire, washing away illusions. The desire doesn't necessarily have to be romantic either. For Karlyn, it's partially career-driven. She's associated with Blue, lifeless, cold as Lester sees her, though when she sees Buddy's big red sign, she's reminded of her goal to be the best. She tells herself that she will sell this house, the scene floods flooded with red as she tries to do so. It once again breaks through the monotony, the red fueled by this rivalry with Buddy. There's a need for her to sell his house and prove her worth, and when she fails, she goes back to this blue and white palette until she gains control of her life again and has an affair with Buddy. Thus, red becomes a symbol of empowerment, of finding a new spark and breaking out of this classic American dream. Look at the difference between Lester and the scenes we see of him at his job in the first and second act. Initially, there's a shot of Lester as he talks to his superior, Brad. The two shots depict their attitudes towards society, with Lester being empty inside and out of place at his job, while Brad is settled in, with all of his clutter and his own nameplate. Lester looks more bare and thus vulnerable and useless against Brad. Then, when Lester decides to quit later, he's framed in this closer shot, and their conversation is over the shoulder, as opposed to these clean singles before. Behind Lester, there's these bits of red that pop out. They were present before, but for Brad, not Lester. Now it becomes Lester's room, as he regains control and power over his place of employment, negotiating his severance package. With power, there's also red as violence. But even when it's associated with some violent image, such as Lester's blood after he gets shot, the darker nature of it is softened by the appearance of roses. And it's partially why roses become so significant. Some of the film's most iconic shots feature these rose petals, creating these beautiful images that usually center around Angela, who, as we know, embodies beauty. The collection of roses and beauty together isn't foreign in American culture. In fact, Frank Sinatra has a song called American Beauty Rose from 1961, where he sings about the choices of flowers he has, yet still chooses an American beauty rose. Thus, roses become something to chase and to cherish in society. They are also the embodiment of desire in the film. But perhaps roses are also ordinary. It's arguably the most famous type of flower. It's already associated with love and lust, and its appearance in American Beauty isn't restricted to just Angela. Take a look at these two family dinner scenes, once again in the first versus second act. The master shots of each look wildly different. Notice how the vase of roses are in the first frame, but not the second. The roses are embedded in the family's dreams of changing things, of being different. But maybe the fact that it's there in the first place also associates roses with being ordinary. Appearing in both of these contexts, roses become a bridge between fantasy and reality. After all, if Angela and Jane are two sides of the same coin, doesn't that mean that being beautiful versus being ordinary is more alike than it is different? To Ricky, that seems to be the case. In his eyes, Angela is the ordinary one, whereas Jane is the beauty, even though the main character of the film spends his time believing the opposite. From the beginning, Ricky takes an interest in Jane, constantly recording her. Angela is never seen in these recordings unless it's with Jane. This voyeuristic nature also extends past Jane. Ricky looks at and records Lester through windows as well. Though voyeurism is inherently a sexual act, this suggests that it's not in this film, at least for Ricky. Instead, it recognizes the beauty in the ordinary, this American dream the Burnham family is wrapped in. It's simply the act of looking itself that becomes important, and it helps overcome loneliness and other problems. For example, during an argument between Jane and her mother, Karlyn slaps her, unfolding this image of a perfect family once more. Jane looks at herself in the mirror, facing the aftermath alone. But then, she goes to the window, where Ricky is already recording her. This moment, and the slow exchange that comes after, suggests that Jane feels seen and comforted by that fact, not angry. In a sense, voyeurism illustrates this desire amongst the characters, the need to be seen, and more than that, to be appreciated as beautiful. A minute later, Frank comes in and physically assaults Ricky, drawing parallels between him and Karlyn. Like Jane, Ricky looks at himself in the mirror, but he doesn't do anything after that. He simply sees himself, and this is because he's already spent his time recognizing beauty. He knows about all the beauty in the world and trivial things. What characterizes this better than the scene where Ricky shows Angela one of his recordings? Watching the simple image of a paper bag floating around the ground, Ricky says this:
Sometimes there's so much beauty in the world. I feel like I can't take it. And my heart is just going to cave in.
It's everyone except Ricky who has yet to see this. And so the film, at its core, is really about a group of people who struggle with the dichotomy between beauty and the ordinary. It's about the ways they come to see the meaning of life. After all, the film starts on a video recording itself, literally marking the beginning of this. And Lester, as the film comes from his perspective, looks through windows himself, but he can't recognize beauty in his life before Angela. But as the film progresses, we get closer and closer to his understanding. The repetition of this aerial shot at the beginning of each act looks at the same thing. This suburban neighborhood neighborhood where the Burnhams live. But each time it's shown, the shot zooms in more and more, offering a new perspective every act. What was once one house in a group of many slowly becomes more singled out, a metaphor for how Lester slowly views more uniqueness in his life. To finally prove this, after his death, Lester relives the most important moments of his life. The film cuts between images of the past and the present, weaving the two together. It's kid Lester laying down in the grass, his grandmother's hands, his cousin's car, Jane, and Karlyn. And in the last few moments of the film, as Lester becomes a mirror of Ricky again, he repeats his words.
I guess I could be pretty pissed off about what happened to me, but it's hard to stay mad when there's so much beauty in the world. Sometimes I feel like I'm seeing it all at once, and it's too much. My heart fills up like a balloon that's about to burst.
Lester realizes that, in all of the disdain he held for his normal, monotonous life, he lost sight of what was really beautiful to him. His childhood, his grandmother, his wife, and his daughter. He reconciles those differences that made Ricky a foil of him. So this American beauty the film thrives on is that realization, that acceptance of life as a whole, for both the ordinary and the beauty. The film starts off criticizing suburbia, but perhaps it says something about an issue within American society, about desire, love, loss, and loneliness. There's a constant chase for beauty and greatness against the fear of being ordinary. Through this, the film develops a new meaning of beauty. Maybe it's more complex than we think. Maybe there's nothing wrong with being ordinary. Maybe these American beauty roses are just as plain as they are special. Maybe life and its appearance is simply what you make of it. And maybe it's been right there all along.